Hello and welcome to the pre-recorded part of my presentation here at Festival. I want to start by thanking Heather Lincoln and the entire team at Lilac for the invitation to join you all at this virtual event. Like most of you, I'm sure I was very much looking forward to sharing my thoughts on teaching and learning in libraries in Manchester, a city I haven't visited but would love to one day, maybe next year. This has been an extraordinarily challenging time for all of us, and has been difficult for me to find ways to hold on to hope. One of the things that gives me hope, a feeling that this whole thing, enduring it, is worth it, are the moments I spend teaching students in the library ways of making knowledge from the stuff of library collections. This is what I love most about my own work. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to share my thoughts on that work in this brief presentation and for the conversation we'll have with each other afterwards. My name is Emily Drabinski, just to give you a brief introduction, and I am currently working as the interim chief librarian at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. Before I started this gig, which was 2 days after our library closed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, I served as the critical pedagogy librarian here. Prior to that, I spent 10 years as an instruction librarian and then coordinator of instruction at Long Island University in downtown Brooklyn, New York. I've written about the politics of knowledge organization. I've also written about information literacy and ideas of time, about critical information literacy, among other things, and I'm glad for the opportunity to share some of my work with you here today. But first, I want to start by talking a little bit about sex. My interest in the politics of knowledge organization began with my first library job as a reference and instruction librarian at a small liberal arts college just outside of New York City. This was one of those gay schools. I'm not sure if you have them in the UK, but at Sarah Lawrence, absolutely everybody was queer. Gender and sexual identity constituted the terrain of play. This was quite a shift from what I remembered from my own heady time as an undergraduate in 1993. That was the year I came out as a lesbian, something that happened after I fell desperately in love with a forbidden person in the smoky hallway of a college party. I don't remember now where that party was or who held it, but I do remember that something about how I understood myself changed fundamentally that night. I wasn't straight anymore. What I was, how I understood myself, is a project that has been unfolding in time for me over the nearly 30 years that have followed. This might be a story you have about yourself too. Back in 1993, there were only a few ways we had of describing ourselves. I could be straight, I could be a lesbian, I could be queer. Gay woman and homosexual were already outdated terms that we sometimes use to make fun of ourselves, but we certainly didn't use to describe and define ourselves. The ways to be a white lesbian back then were pretty much limited to butch and femme. And I use the white qualifier both because I am white and to remind us all that gender and sexual identity language is always also raced and classed. And I had access to about 3 sexuality options. You could be a top, a bottom, or a switch. I don't even know if those terms are in use anymore. But when I started at Sarah Lawrence in 2003, everything had changed. There were so many other ways to be gay. It was only just a decade between my time as an undergraduate and theirs, but that decade had seen an explosion of ways to publicly inhabit queer sexuality and gender. You could still be a femme, but you could also be a farm femme. You could be a glitter femme. You could be trans, gender queer, non-binary. You could be any kind of boy you wanted to be and still be a part of the crowd. And for me, as an adult at the time, it was dizzying. The speed with which identity-based language around sexuality and gender changed truly blew my mind. And it was my job to teach those students how to find books about themselves in our library catalog. And that sort of navigating between the myriad burgeoning ways that students had to describe themselves and the fixed systems against which they had to interact to retrieve information and materials, that was sort of the nexus of my interest in how we can think critically about the catalog and what that critical thinking can do for how we teach in the classroom students to use our systems to locate materials inside of our collections. This is what I had to work with. So I worked in the United States, and all of our libraries use the Library of Congress classification structure, and I taught students how to navigate subclass HQ. This is the part of the Library of Congress classification system that's famous in some critical librarianship circles for the ways it tells a very clear story about gender, sexuality, and the ways these two parts of ourselves structure the lifespan. We can start here with the subclass title itself, the family, marriage, women. What do we see as missing from this? Men, certainly. Men are not tied concretely to the family and marriage. They have sort of an identity outside of those two institutions. It's women who are seen as central to that, right? Men are erased from it. They sit underneath it. They are out at work. They are doing things other than being married, right? But women are tied here as another thing that men, the unmarked category, have: family, marriage, and women. Sexual life is the general category. Heterosexuality is not named, but implied. It's the norm that does not need to identify itself and against which everything else must be understood and defined. Then we begin in HQ 7172 to talk about sexual deviations. And what comes after that are things that are deviations from the norm: bisexuality, homosexuality, and lesbianism. Those are listed in the classification as two different things: transvestism, transsexualism. And then we move to sort of more socially, you can see it as sort of progressing from socially best and most acceptable to least acceptable: sadism, masochism, fetishism, prostitution, and then masturbation. And I think it depends on how the cultural moment views masturbation, but to see it in this list tells us something about how it was viewed at the time that the classification was developed. And then sexual life is followed by what it's all ostensibly for: the family, marriage, and home. And for those of us whose queerness includes the subversion of those kinds of normal family types, this ideological story excludes us and the ways that we form familial connections and how we engage in reproductive labor. So how do I, as an information literacy librarian, teach students to navigate this problematic structure, to fit themselves and their beautiful profusion of ways of being into a classification structure that would order their lives in this way? And because classification structures determine how we order books on shelves, what does this mean for how students encounter their own stories when they are navigating through library stacks? Classification, of course, is not the only problem. Cataloging is too. These are the terms, the standardized, controlled terms that the Library of Congress gives us as subject headings to assign to materials about sexual and gender and sexual identity in our library collections. And when our patrons search our library catalogs, come up, they type in a word, and then the computer matches that word against the language that's in the subject headings and spits back out, retrieves sort of the books on a given topic using these controlled headings. It's essentially a word matching system is how I think about it. And of course, this is radically simplifying how all of this works. I also wonder how relevant subject headings are in the age of keywords, natural language processing, algorithms, Google. And I want to put a pin in that, and maybe we can discuss it after this pre-recorded presentation. But I think subject headings matter, both for information retrieval. They serve a function for us, right? And grouping all materials on a given topic together and allowing us to retrieve them at once, but also for the ways that we encounter the screen. And if I search for glitter femme lesbian or aromantic or even butch or femme, the library subject headings at best don't help me, and at worst obscure what I might be looking for, make it even harder to find. So when I'm teaching students how to use the library catalog, how do I respond when the subject language that they encounter is exclusionary or offensive? And for me, this is a stark information literacy problem, a challenge I have when I'm standing up in front of a classroom. And we can look through these headings and, for many of us, they won't feel offensive. But I think for others, both the language itself is challenging as it exists in the catalog, and also what isn't here, what can't be retrieved using subject headings. Around gender and sexuality is the other part of the problem. So when I enter a library classroom as a teacher, here's a little image of me from back in 1990 or back from 2003. I understand that I see my job as having two essential tasks. First, I have to teach students how to use library systems and structures to retrieve information that privileges some ways of knowing and not others, some ways of being and not others. A system that is built on exclusions, that tells stories about who and what matters in the world, stories that I might not necessarily agree with, that can be offensive to some, right? And these aren't systems that I can burn down or throw out. I think often when we're talking about the ways that information systems embed sort of exclusions into our systems, the desire we have, because it can be so enraging and infuriating, is to throw it out. One of the claims that I make in some of my work is that that's just a condition of language itself. It's a condition of being in the world in any kind of a social way, is that we enter into a system that has to exclude at the moment that it marks things. And I can say more about that in the Q&A if folks are interested. But I can't burn it down because I need it. Without a classification structure and a set of subject headings, information can't be retrieved at all. It's a big sort of pile of books that I have to paw through as I'm trying to find the one that I want. There's no way out of needing a system to order things and to enable retrieval. And, in the case of something like Google or OneSearch is our sort of platform that we use here, what do they call it, a discovery layer. You can tell it's like I'm so befuddled by all of the systems that we're forced to use, but those systems, you can't read the retrieval mechanism. Why does Google give me what it does, right? If you burn it all down and throw it out, what are you left with would be a question I would ask, right? So I have nursing students who need 5 peer-reviewed, evidence-based practice articles about wound care before they leave the classroom. Burning down systems of exclusion won't get them that. So first, I see it as my task to help students learn how to interact with the system that is biased against them, that has put up barriers to their own ways of knowing and ways of being, and help them figure out how to get what they need out of the system, right? So the first thing I have to do is teach you how to use the system, even as I might find it offensive, exclusionary, heteronormative, racist, all of those things. Second, my task is to teach students that the systems they're using to find what they need are systems that are built by human beings, that reflect and reproduce dominant ways of understanding the world, and that those can be made different by librarians like me who care about that and do, and librarians that I know, radical catalogers who do the work of trying to correct and reform these systems so that they're better instead of throwing them out, and that they can be made better by advocates like students themselves. So for me, this is the task of the critical information literacy instructor. I want to teach you both how this system is reflective of power, and here are the tools that you need in order to get what you need from the system. And hopefully, over the course of that instruction session, I can show you some points for potential resistance. So what does this look like in practice? What does it look like in the information literacy classroom? For me, it looks like teaching students the catalog as a text, right? And I think there's a lot of talk in the field about the sort of one shot being terrible, and I stand up and I show you how to navigate a database, and students can do that, and that's not sort of what students need. They don't need me to show them how to type words into a search box. But what I do think students need is a way of understanding and reading the records that they retrieve for the kind of critical sort of perspective that I've sort of started this talk with. So for me, it looks like teaching the catalog as a text, one that can be evaluated and analyzed to tell us both where to find the book we need, right? Where is it on the shelf? And for me, that's the heart of the job, right? As an information literacy instructor, I want to connect people to the information they need. It also tells us something about how power works in the world. So I'll just give you a little example here. This is a book by Tanisha Ford, who is a faculty member here at the Graduate Center in our history program. And she's written a book called Liberated Threads, Black Women, Style, and the Global Politics of Soul. According to the jacket copy of this book, it is about how Black women have used their clothing, hair, and style as a tool of resistance. Whether using stiletto heels as weapons to protect against police attacks, or incorporating African-themed designs into everyday wear, these fashion-forward women celebrated identities and pushed for equality. Ford focuses on the emergence of the soul style movement represented in clothing, jewelry, and hairstyles to demonstrate how Black women's fashion choices became galvanizing symbols of gender and political liberation. So reading this jacket copy, we can see that the book is clearly about social and political change. It's about how to make revolution and how that's made possible by Black women in the United States and around the world. It's about the ways that sort of personal identity is mobilized to make that kind of change. It's about power, right? When I teach students how to retrieve the record for the book, how do I find this book on the shelf? This on the right, you'll see the subject headings that are assigned to the book in our catalog. The content of the book is flattened. We see a woman with a bullhorn on the cover of the book. And if you've held a bullhorn, you know that you're always doing it because you're about to make some significant social change. That's what you're after. But for the terms that the cataloger has used, this is reduced to minority women. It's reduced to feminine beauty, to personal beauty, to stereotypes, right? What's missing from this list is anything that would capture what Tanisha Ford's work is striving towards, right? Greater equality, a sort of collapse of white supremacy and patriarchy. It's sort of flattens and against the bullhorn image that we see here. And that's, I think, a problem, right? That's a mismatch. So when we're sort of talking about subject headings and designing exercises that help students sort of encounter the catalog and encounter information organization as a thing that exists in the world, we can take the time to sort of talk through and talk out with them what that subject language does, what it highlights, what it makes findable, and then on the flip side, what that obscures. So if I'm coming to the library catalog and what I want to search for is minority women, I want to do work on minority women in the United States, the cataloging language will facilitate that kind of research and facilitate me in making knowledge in that area. If I come to the catalog and what I really want to find out about is what do I need to do to make revolution? What do I need to do to claim power? How do I understand how Black women and their work for liberation shapes politics in the United States? None of that is available here in the record. And I see this as a problem, not just for the fact that it doesn't sort of accurately represent this, right? But also because it doesn't give us a way into research about social change, right? So that's an example of how I might, in the library classroom, teach a person why and how this matters to them in the catalog. So for me, this is the paradox and pleasure of teaching the radical catalog. If we bring to our teaching of information skills, of information literacy, an analysis of structural power and how it relates to information organization and retrieval, what and how we teach is fundamentally different. We can equip our students with the capacity to wring what they need out of library structures and wringing what you need out of systems that exclude you is a necessary life skill for survival, revolution, I would argue. And we can also help build a way of shaping students as agents of change, both inside the library and out. When you can begin to see how systems and structures are not neutral, how they are always and everywhere built by human beings and who are subject to ideology and power, that can extend to all kinds of other systems that we interact with in the world that we might see as invisible. Immigration, healthcare, access to the virus, or access to the vaccine. Access to the virus is like one of the most equitably distributed things on the planet, but access to vaccines, access to housing and healthcare, safe streets, right? Anything where a structure enables some of us to live full lives and others of us to struggle. That's harder to see in other parts of the systems, right? But in the library, it's as easy as reading the catalog as a text, reading the catalog as a book that will tell you very true stories about how power works in the world. So that's the claim. I think that we have a lot of potential as information literacy instructors working with the text that we have to sort of inspire in our students resistance to those kinds of systems. And that's what I look forward to talking with you all about in the next few minutes. Okay, thank you.